Everyone, this is the full, more or less edited version of the interview I did with vSanteri. Share the information with me. If you like this stuff, like it, comment, hit that subscribe-le and the bell, because I can't, I don't know how to do this shit. Anyway, yeah, just let me know if you like it. Enjoy. Okay. Hello. All right, we're good.
We're good? Okay.
For those people that are unfamiliar with your work, do you want to explain a little bit about yourself and your history in the games industry and other projects you've worked on?
Yeah, sure. I'm a senior environment artist, worked in games for about 9 or 10 years, depending on when you start counting. I'm self-taught. I dropped out of college and started learning 3D. Those were kind of unrelated events, but it worked out. So yeah, I started working on a game called Midair in early 2014. Wasn't getting paid at the time, it was just more of a hobby project. But then we kickstarted that game and made it into a startup, so I started getting paid around 2015, so that's 9 years ago. Yeah, Midair was a sort of, maybe we'll have some footage of it here. It was a jetpacky sci-fi shooter thing, very closely related to the Tribes series of games. So I worked on that until 2018 when it launched and flopped and the company folded. Then I worked on some freelance after that for a couple of years at a mobile company as well for 6 months in like 2019. And I went on to work at Troll7 on Oli Oli World in 2020 as an environment artist there for 18 months. Worked on Oli Oli World base game, then the first DLC, and then a bit of the second DLC as well. And then yeah, I got poached eventually by Sad Owl Studios. I don't want to say poached. I'm pretty sure I just applied. Went to Sad Owl, which was actually called Robot Turtle at the time, but same company. They just changed the name. So yeah, joined them for Viewfinder in 2022, so 2 years ago. And yeah, been there ever since. People might know me if they follow game dev people on Twitter. I like my personal project shit this occasionally.
You always just post like some random really dope personal project out of nowhere. And it's like, oh yeah, I was just noodling on this. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? How?
I've been really lazy recently though, so I haven't really done much in like a year almost. Maybe it's been less than that, but it feels like ages.
And then even just the story of you going through, it's like with college and being self-taught seems to be a running theme, just most of the industry right now, just because of how either insanely great or insanely terrible the education system is, and just education in general in terms of game dev. It's always interesting to hear.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I didn't even go to like game dev or even art school, right? Like my college degree would have been like Bachelor's of Engineering in Media Technology or some shit like that. But yeah, definitely whenever the game dev education discourse comes around again, which it does fairly frequently on Twitter.
Every like 2 months.
Yeah, exactly right. I do feel quite strongly that I'm on the side that you don't really need the formal education, right? Like there's good arguments for why you would, like visas and stuff, or if you just aren't the kind of person who can really self-direct. But for me, I've kind of, I guess, always been decent, at least at like teaching myself and finding resources, even though it's it can be super hard. But yeah.
So can you tell us what exactly Viewfinder is and when you decided to join the team? Like, what was that onboarding process like? And when in the timeline of the project did you join?
Yeah, so Viewfinder is this quite interesting, I think we're often calling it a mind-bending narrative first-person puzzle game. So it centers around the idea of you having a camera and you can take pictures of the world, and then those pictures turn back into 3D objects, or you can find pictures of things and then use those to solve puzzles in interesting ways. I think if people are sort of on the Twitters, they may have seen the early tweets that the game director Matt posted like 5 years ago now or something, which is kind of went viral, and then he I'm pretty sure he, like, the company formed around just him having a bunch of viral tweets about this cool game idea. But anyway, I joined, like I said, 2 years ago, 2022. That was pretty sure right after they had finished their vertical slice and were ready to go into full production, is when they recruited me. So I wasn't really there for any pre-production. Most of the art style was kind of set. I just joined to basically pump out content, right? Just make levels as much as possible.
So what exactly was the onboarding process like? Because it's a smaller indie studio. It was during, I guess it was still fully COVID time in 2022.
Yeah.
So like, what was that like? Because I've never worked with a studio that small, and this is their first IP too, right?
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember back to like over 2 years ago, but yeah, so they're a fully remote studio, right? Or we are, and I've got, like, most of my career has been fully remote, online only studios anyway. So the COVID thing, I don't think that really affected things there. Yeah, onboarding with like small studios tends to be, a lot less formal. Obviously, like, you don't get all the bureaucracy of big companies, like filling all these forms and get onto these million different HR platforms that they always seem to want you to log on to. It was definitely a learning process, onboarding, right? Like, learning all of the technical limitations, figuring out exactly how I was going to work. Because, I mean, that really wasn't super clear even at that point, even though I did say they sort of had things figured out. But, like, really figuring out the pipeline of, like, how are we going to get these levels from a sort of gray box to final, how are we going to build that pipeline? That did kind of have to be solved a little bit.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like the very normal game dev special of, we have a really solid idea of how this is going to work, but we don't really know how it's going to work. So we're just going to try and see how it inevitably works out mid development, right?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you just got to try and see, right? So like, what happened is that basically my lead just assigned a level for me, and I just worked on that, tried to figure out how to do things, how to work within all the limitations.
I remember seeing those those random tweets about it, and it was insane then, and the fact that it's a full blew my mind because I had no idea how that works.
Yeah,
because of my own.
I don't either, right? Like, I just know the 3D art aspects, but who knows how it actually works under the hood.
I guess on that note, speaking of like limitations and stuff, with the idea that you could take a picture of basically nearly anything in the level and recreate a mini instance of the photo.
Yeah.
What were some things that you really had to focus on to make sure nothing would break the game? Because I feel like I never tested this, but I kind of just thought of this earlier. It's like, theoretically, you could take a photo of a whole landscape and then create a new instance of the said landscape, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what was the thought process behind the design of the levels and like set dressing as a whole, if you can go into that?
Yeah, so this is the sort of technical limitations part where I have the most notes, because there's quite a bit. Even though,
literally, yap until your heart contents, because so many people are really interested in this stuff, and I'm really interested in this stuff. So, and for entirely a selfish reason, I get to learn about all this stuff. I don't give a shit if no one cares about this. Is for me now.
yeah. So it's interesting. So there's a few things, right? I think right out of the gate, the sort of most foundational thing in terms of just like level design and scale is that, because you can essentially duplicate geometry often quite a lot. There's a couple of levels where you can essentially have infinite photos, at least one that has this sort of recursive loop where you can keep duplicating a piece of geometry forever. And because of that, and just like the photo mechanic, it just means that the levels had to be quite small, right? So it is sort of one puzzle per level, and there's, I think, 75 AD levels in the game.
Yeah.
But they're fairly contained, and they have to be. Yeah, you couldn't really have any kind of open world looking thing, because you just crash your PC if you try to duplicate it, maybe even once,
just
right?
A little bit, just an entire fucking vista that
goes
for miles and miles for no reason.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, I mean, there's a sort of background vista layer of geometry that's like always there, that doesn't get affected by the photos, or can't get captured by the photos, or like it does, but it gets captured as like a 2D plane essentially, I think. There's like there's mountains and clouds and stuff in the background, and you're not gonna be able to reach them and stuff like that. But yeah, so levels can't really be big. Try count or poly count's fairly limited. There was never really any official like guidelines for like, you know, triangle counts per level or anything, or triangle count on screen. But I think most of the levels in Viewfinder ended up being like easily less than like 500,000 triangles for the entire level, right? So like fairly low poly.
That makes sense.
Because yeah, like if you can, you know, take a photo of the entire level and then duplicate it, you know, that needs to not be awfully slow. And like,
imagine during testing, like someone tried to do that almost immediately.
Yeah, for sure. And in some levels, like you do still like duplicate quite a bit of geometry, right? Because like the camera frustum, especially because it like, you know, it essentially extends into infinity, right, in the depth axis. So like, you know, you take a picture of a wall, but then you're also going to capture everything that was behind it, you know, and then, you know, because camera frustum is like a cone, you know, it gets larger as it goes further away. So, you know, if you had really big levels, then you'd just be capturing an absolute shit ton of stuff. And then, you know, you sort of essentially you use the camera frustum, the 4 planes of the camera frustum as a Boolean object, right? And you sort of cut through all the geo and then create a new mesh with that, and then, you know, that gets stored into some kind of buffer that's now the photo, and then you can place that object somewhere else in the world, and then that object will in turn, if you place it in a way where it intersects with existing geometry, then that'll also cut the existing geometry, you know, like a Boolean. So there's a lot of, you know, geo being stored into, you know, memory. And so yeah, even if a level is like 500k triangles in total, but then, you know, you're taking photos of it, so you're storing like, you know, a bunch of that geo in a buffer in memory somewhere. Again, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about in terms of how it actually works, but like, I know the broad outlines.
Man, to be fair, like, I remember when that one clip went viral on the Twitter sphere, because I refuse to call it X. Everyone was just trying to figure it out. It's such a cool mechanic to see. And I think the only person that would know how to do it is your main creative director and like your lead who would set all that up. But it's
basically our
smart mechanic.
Yeah, it's our creative director Matt who originally prototyped it, and then it's our principal programmer Jacob Keane who, as far as I understand, sort of actually made it work in production, right? Like I'm pretty sure he made it like over 10 times faster and stuff like that, right? So like, yeah, and that's the other thing, I guess, in terms of like optimization and like performance considerations, we really weren't ever like concerned with like how the game actually runs, you know, when you're just walking around, right? That's again because like it's not that, you know, it's not really that complex visually or anything. But what was the sort of where we were really concerned was the like when you take a photo or place a photo, right? Like that could not go above a certain millisecond amount, which I can't remember what it was, but like, you know, so yeah, like didn't really have like FPS worries as artists. But then but if you put like way too much geo into a level, then taking photos would become a lot slower because obviously you're gonna have to process a lot more geo. So other
no, go on.
Yeah. So other like sort of key workflow things that we have to worry about. And again, I'll hopefully have videos for this, but all meshes have to be watertight. Really important, right? You can't really Boolean any object that's like has an open face, right? It'll very often go to shit. So every mesh has to be watertight, except for some stuff like decals or some one-sided planes are fine in some cases, right? So watertight, and that ensures that the mesh actually gets sort of sliced properly. You don't get any ugly geo artifacts. One material per mesh, which is kind of a crazy limitation, but yeah. So
shit, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Fuck, I never noticed that just because the art style was. One, it's varied from like level to level, but even when it was some of the levels you worked on, I never really noticed it just because the art direction was so solid and everything just felt really good the entire time. Most people would never think about it. It's like, oh, it's everything here like every one object is one material.
Yeah.
Which is so cool.
Yeah, so like, again, hopefully video here. I was planning on doing a demonstration, but like, in a normal setting, you might do some kind of wall, or in a normal game production, you might do some kind of wall module maybe that has like a bunch of different materials, right? You'll do like a wood and maybe a stone with wood trims and maybe some metal trims as well and stuff like that, all on the same mesh, and it probably won't have to be watertight. Viewfinder kind of completely different, where materials kind of have to be one material per mesh, and then kind of with most things we tried to make it so what we call cross sections, which are the sort of new faces that are generated when you slice through an object, right? You get this new, brand new dynamically created face or polygon or set of polygons, right? If you had multiple materials per object, then you couldn't really determine what that cross section looks like in terms of what textures, what material it has. And also similarly, like this is where on some props you will see this in the game if you really look hard enough, is that if you have a prop with this like standard sort of uniquely textured, where you've got just the same unique textures that have metal bits here and then wood bits here and yada yada yada, maybe plastic bits here, all in the same texture, same material. If you then slice through it, you will see that all of those materials have the exact same cross section material, because you can't do it any other way. So yeah, and so making sure that those cross sections sort of always works, really big thing. So that like you slice through a wooden thing, so that you see the cross section, you get a wood texture there. Yeah, and that stuff like that. And then again, because of this and because of like the watertight thing, that means that like we would end up modeling quite a bit of sort of extra geometry, right? Quite often, like there'll be just like, if I have like a concrete wall that's then paneled over with a wood paneling thing, that wood paneling is a whole mesh that's has actual thickness to it, and has the sort of backside and then the wood or the concrete as well.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so that if you slice through it, you'll actually see those materials
and like all the insides.
Yeah, on the insides, and some props as well. We sort of model the insides when we had the time and when it makes sense. Like maybe not everything by far, but like a bunch of stuff was modeled so that it actually has interiors. If you slice it, you can see, like I think like TVs and stuff have like electronics inside. If you bother to look, if you bother to like destroy a TV, it'll have stuff inside. Shaders pretty restricted, like because it requires such special shaders. You don't like artists don't really have the opportunity or the ability to do any kind of shader graph stuff what you would do in Unreal Engine. This is Viewfinder's made in Unity, by the way. I should have mentioned that at the start, but yeah. So no shader graph stuff for artists, so very limited shader options. We had basically a standard shader that's used on like 90% of stuff that was just like your basic PBR maps and then a tinting ability, and that's about it. And then a blend material.
You really had to keep it super simple, just to make sure there's no other issues that can arrive when you're doing this insane mechanic and all these like random contingencies that can appear.
Yeah, exactly.
Made gameplay. Got it.
Yeah,
and so cool.
And then like same. And then there's a blend material for like mostly used on floors. Really, like we could have used the sort of blend materials more and done standard vertex painting stuff and added some variation to our we have a lot of blank concrete walls because the art style is very sort of brutalist concrete everywhere. But we kind of the art director decided we wouldn't do that, so it's mostly floors that have been like grown over with a bunch of foliage, and so we just paint a bunch of grass onto the concrete materials on the floor and stuff like that. But really, like basically two shaders. Very limited decals. We did have decals, but they're only alpha cutout, not alpha blend, which means that you're super limited in what you can actually do with decals, and they wouldn't always behave right, so we kind of end up not using them a whole lot.
Just use them in like very niche sections to where like there's no way the player's really gonna probably cut this wall.
Yeah, or I mean, we did use them a little bit, but like especially like just the having the alpha cutout and not having transparency to work with makes decals quite a lot less appealing for the stuff that I would have used them for. Like if I could have sort of had like a really nice decal system, like debuffer decals in Unreal, maybe I would have added more like weathering on all the concrete stuff, like you see in actual real life brutalist buildings, but like that very faint weathering and stuff like that. But like if you don't have transparency in your decals, you can't really do that. No LODs, which is interesting, right? But makes total sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because like, so small levels again, sort of restricted there for various reasons, and so it means that LOD is not that necessary. But you're still, I don't know. It did kind of bug me that we're like, kind of rendering a bunch of unnecessary shit all the time without LODs. But like, how would you possibly account for LODs when you're taking pictures? Something's at a load 4. When you're far away from it, you take a picture. You have to store all that geo in the wherever and then place it somewhere else. Then how do you account for all of those different LOD models for everything with all that geo being dynamically transformed as well? Basically,
yeah,
I don't think
with how fairly limited the poly count was in like per level, they probably just kept it to that. They limit tested it to the. Y'all probably limit tested it to the point where it's like, if we keep it here, we don't really need LODs.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Make sure just everything runs, right?
Yeah, but it is an interesting problem that I've occasionally thought about. Is like, could we do bigger levels if we did LODs somehow? But that's like just a massive can of worms. So I don't know.
How far can this mechanic go?
Yeah, exactly. But also like, again, because like like a camera frustum extends out to infinity, so with a really big level, you're kind of not getting much benefit out of that camera mechanic. Like, if it was depth limited, then you'd get maybe some more interesting results. But like, you take if you have like a massive open world and you take a picture, or like delete a bit with like a picture, you're deleting a massive sort of, imagine like a pizza slice, a wedge-shaped area from your entire world, like up to infinity, So like that doesn't really work in a large game setting. So it's probably like a moot point to even try to think about that. And then the final bit, or actually the final 2 bits of technical details: static lighting for the entire game, right? We wanted high quality lighting, and dynamic lighting couldn't really do that for us. So static lighting, standard light map.
Were all the shadows inherently baked, or were they like?
Oh yeah, actually no, I didn't write my notes for this, but this is So to clarify, actually, it is a fairly hacky custom lighting solution, even with the static lighting, because we bake only indirect lighting into light maps, and then the sunlight, basically, every level is just lit by the sun. There's very few. I mean, that's the only dynamic light in the game. So then the sun shadow map is generated in real time, I want to say. Yeah, it has to be, in real time. And even that is pretty interesting, because like usually you create shadow map cascades sort of dynamically around the player, right? What we did instead is that there's basically just one giant shadow map for the entire level. It's like a 4K texture, just you open up the shadow map and you look at it, and it's literally just like a render of the of the level from the perspective of the sun, right? That's how you get a shadow map. But it's an interesting way to do it, where you just include everything, the entire level. And that's another way where like our levels being quite small made sense for this, right? Where
100%.
And you see this if you look for it in there's some sort of larger levels in the game, and you can see, or I could definitely see while working on them, that like this is getting a bit too large for the shadow map resolution, because if you stretch out the level further than sort of normal, then you're gonna start like losing shadow map resolution quite quickly, or the text density on the shadow maps. But yeah, so the indirect lighting is baked into light maps, so they look kind of strange. And then like if there's point lights in the game, stuff like that, those are all baked into the light maps, and then that's then combined with the dynamic sunlight. Small break here, because then sort of final bit on the lighting is that yes, static lighting for almost everything, but then there are dynamic objects, and so those have to be dynamically lit. I think it's some kind of a light probe situation with those. I'm never super happy with how the lighting looks on the dynamic objects. I think they sort of always look out of place, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. And then also all the cross-section geometry, right? That's always dynamically created, so you can't static light that. So that's also dynamically lit with like a light probe thing. And then I mean,
any of the actually, here I should ask it anyway. Since it wasn't dynamic, I assume it would help fix the problem with all the constant like booleans creating new geo with the photos and all that stuff. Like, did you have many problems with dealing with the mechanic in terms of lighting, or
yeah,
pretty straightforward?
I mean, obviously this is like all again our brilliant principal programmer Jacob, who I'm pretty sure sorted out most of this. I do remember it, like there were quite a few issues with lighting, because like that's the whole thing with this kind of with the viewfinder mechanic, is that like you can prototype it in a simple setting fairly easily, right? So what it looked like at the beginning with Matt just posting those viral tweets, but then getting to like dealing with all of the edge cases and getting it like production ready is where the actual work is. And so that took them a couple of years at least, you know. And like we're definitely struggling with the lighting, and there's a lot of ways where it can go wrong, you know. And so getting that really nice, like, or at least accurate enough sort of lighting on those cross-section polygons, like one quite big problem as far as I understand. Then there's just all the stuff with like, you know, you're creating all this like new geo on the fly. How do you even decide how the shadows behave? God, it's really even hard to like wrap your mind around it. But like, you know, you take a photo of a spot that has like a wall that's, you know, partly in sun, partly in shadow. You place it somewhere else. Does that shadow remain the same as it was in the original spot? First, it doesn't. It gets sort of, you know, lit again because it, you know, it's now in a different spot. So now the sun is hitting that spot differently in the photo. It's all sort of, it messes with your head. This is all these edge cases of like, what should actually even happen, you know, without even getting into the sort of bugs and weird stuff, but like, how should this actually even behave when you take photos and stuff happens, you know? Yeah, that's always interesting and strange. Like, or like, you know, one of the things is we had a couple of bits where like, you know, you get a photo or you take a photo, and then if you turn it upside down, a bunch of stuff that's dynamic objects will fall out, you know, affected by gravity. And that's pretty cool. That's a cool moment. But then you can't really keep doing that much, you know? You kind of do have to just sort of say that like photos aren't really affected by gravity, you know, and then it's like kind of inconsistent and weird. Oh, and another if I remember it, another sort of interesting and annoying lighting thing is because of those, you know, having to have like that watertight mesh restriction and one material per mesh restriction. If we have something like, you know, like I was saying earlier, a concrete wall that's then covered by wood paneling, and we're using static lighting, meaning polygons get, you know, light map space. You have, you know, two quads there, you know, the back side of the wood panel and then the front side of the concrete that's covered by the wood panel, that are sort of unnecessary wasted light map space, right? Like they are just going to be pitch black on the light map because they're just interior geometry, but there's no good automatic way to like detect that and get rid of it. You know, we're not going to do manual light mapping for entire levels, so
yeah, I was gonna ask like if you had to make your own light maps or it was all done.
Yeah, nah, it's all like 99% is just done in Unity. I think there was a couple of small things where I tweaked the light maps by hand. That was like very sort of edge cases where I noticed that I just wasn't really happy with how the auto packing in Unity worked out. And then luckily we could do things like you start building bigger levels, your light map size is gonna go, you know, up quite fast. You have, you know, or especially if you have like sort of quite large sort of background geo-ish, that's kind of still like the final level in the game kind of has this where there's this sort of huge towering buildings in one spot. And that was a spot where I definitely had to go like, okay, I'm just gonna reduce the light map size on these big boys to like 25% of what they should be, which luckily Unity has pretty good tools for. That's something I'm pretty sure Unreal doesn't really have, where you can just go to an object and say, boost the light map res on this instance of the object in the level, boost the light map res on this one, and then reduce it on this one. And that's quite handy in Unity.
Throughout this whole thing, I've been fairly understanding the process of it, and like these weird, very, very specific edge cases and like problems you would have to solve as an artist. And I'm sitting, and now I'm at the point where I'm like, fuck, that's like, I just hear my brain starting to fry in a good way. I'm just like, damn, that's like, just thinking about all these different edge cases throughout the entire production cycle must have been really fulfilling in a way, because now it's like, oh, I know what to do if we continue to expand out, whether it be with Viewfinder or another game that somehow implements this mechanic to a larger scale. It's like, it's just really cool to understand and like, or just hear this side of everything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and
Okay.
yeah, I think in a way again, like kind of luckily, like these restrictions were pretty figured out by the time I got here. Like I didn't need to sit down and figure all this stuff out. Yeah, it was definitely still a struggle, and like we had pretty good internal tools for like checking that every mesh is watertight and giving us warnings if there's more than one material per mesh and stuff like that. Those debug tools can only go so far. By the time we were sort of like done, quote unquote, with production, had to do a massive cleanup pass going through the entire game and making sure we actually caught all the errors, and go back to like a prop you made in a hurry 3 months ago and like, shit, there's a triangle missing here, and so it's giving me a watertight error, stuff like that. And the watertight tools aren't perfect. They would sometimes complain about get false positives, but not often. Yeah.
Damn. That fuck. Sorry, I kind of like locked in listening to what you were saying. I forgot what I was gonna ask right after. We already answered the adjustments to your workflow.
Oh, I did have some notes that I didn't yet. Like.
Yeah.
So, like, yes, like all the stuff we talked about earlier. But then, like, I guess when you sent me this question, I sort of interpreted in a way where, like, is there something that's sort of stuck with me even afterwards? And so that's kind of what I wrote down here, is that, like,
Go for it.
Like, living in this weird Viewfinder world with these restrictions of watertight meshes and one material per mesh, I think's kind of messed with my brain and my intuitions for 3D, where like in my personal projects I'll steer towards that more intuitively, like I'll sort of forget that, oh, actually most games don't have these restrictions and I don't actually need to worry about them, because I've just been doing this for quite a while now, and yeah, it's sort of set in. But then I also had some notes here about, hold on, I think it's actually worth even saying. I guess I'll say this now as well. Since there's like other sort of permanent adjustments, or there's things I learned during the production, right, is that it sort of reinforced my belief that like always kind of build a pipeline, even for yourself, even for personal projects. You should always look to set up your own asset pipeline, assuming it's not like just a couple of props, but like set things up, be clean about your production, even if it's just your personal portfolio stuff. And like, because once you've set that up and figured it out, then it's just much easier to go through actual production of, when you have to work on an actual game and make like 200 props or something, over the course of the project, or like I don't know how many props I did. I didn't work on that many props actually on Viewfinder, because we did have a dedicated prop artist, but still made up, I don't know, a few dozen at least, right? And then like 50 of the levels in the game, so over half of the levels in the game are my work, so there's a lot of stuff that I worked on, and so like the speed was essential, right? I think that maybe I should emphasize that a bit more. It's just that like they kind of brought me on, and who knows if this is why they hired me, but like working previously in Ollie sort of taught me that like or it taught me this sort of kind of a strict production pipeline of, you know, Oli World had like 120-ish levels, 100 levels, I don't know. And I worked on like a quarter of those during my time there, and so that ended up being like, you know, you have around 3 or 4 days to work on per level, from grey box to final. That's not a lot of time. So like,
wait, only 3 to 4 days for Oli?
Yeah, something like that. Sometimes 5, and then I think we scheduled like 1 day extra per level for polish at the end.
Okay.
But yeah, roughly like that. And it was doable. You know, we had good tools for Oli. We didn't make like basically any, like, or very rarely did we make like unique geo for new levels, right? We had a asset library kind of thing for each of the 5 zones in Oli, and then, you know, you just you get your grey box and you get maybe some rough idea from narrative about what's in this level, and then you just go and start populating it and try to make it look good. But yeah, so that I don't want to call it a grueling dev cycle, because it definitely wasn't. Like, you know, at Earl 7 they were really careful about not working us, like putting us through overtime or anything like that, but it was still like fairly tight. And so all of that learning then came with me to Viewfinder, and it was kind of the same here, right? Like, it's rare that I would spend even a week on a level, because yeah, I did, you know, there's a lot of levels to work on. And yeah, and finished is better than perfect. So yeah. And also, I mean, we worked on sort of passes on Viewfinder as well, right? Where we'd do like a rough art pass, then let it sit for a while, and then come back and do a refining pass, and, you know, final set dressing pass. The narrative might come in and do a pass, putting like notes and journals and stuff in the level, and then we maybe do a final polish pass, doing things like adding level specific wires and cables between some electronic props and stuff like that, like custom modeling shit at the end. That was actually a really good workflow. That it's kind of hard to sometimes to organize production like that, you know, like, oh, let's just bring every level up to like 70% at first throughout the entire game, you know, and then come back and polish. But I'm kind of a firm believer in that. Like, that's kind of how you have to do, to some extent, you have to organize indie development like this, where, you know, you bring things up to like 78% at first, where it's like probably good enough to ship if you really have to, and then at the end you know, you come back and you do a polish pass if you can, because, you know, the 80-20 rule or whatever it is, you know, you spend what even is it, you know, you get diminishing returns as the more and more you polish, right? Like, you end up spending much more and more time.
Perpetually chip at something until,
yeah,
either way you just hate it as the artist, and then everyone's like, no, it's fun, you can just stop.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, almost no one is gonna notice, and, you know, actually something being 95%, you know, finished and shipping is almost always good enough. Sorry, that was just a bit of a production rant there. But yeah.
What was the section that you worked on that you were most proud? Fuck! What was the section in Viewfinder that you were the most proud of, whether it be from a technical problem solving standpoint or even just from a art direct focus standpoint? Like, what was your favorite thing you worked on, and why?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to choose, because I'm quite proud of a lot of the stuff, even though, like I said, like, it's not like I could, you know, really pour my heart into any of these levels and really polish them. And also, because of all the limitations, it's like, it's not like the most amazing artwork I've ever made, but like, there's still a couple of bits that I'm really proud of. There's this sort of weather machine level towards the end of the game that's a really pivotal point in the narrative, and I got to have a lot of impact on that, in terms of level design, as well as like everything in it, like, ended up kind of being that I got to drive a lot of it, and it ended up being pretty cool artistically as well. So like, I did a bit of, well, it's hard to even call it level design, because it is a very simple level. You just basically move forward and get some narrative spoken at you, and then stuff happens. but it was really cool, and I got to I think my decisions ended up impacting how the narrative works there as well a little bit, and I got to design a really cool machine for that, the sort of weather controlling machine that you try to turn on and then it doesn't work and it falls apart. So yeah, I got to design and model that. Yeah, so that was fun. But then I also should just mention like the first level in the game. I think I'm pretty happy with that. Actually, that's another one where like we had a first level and it was kind of meh. That's why we went back to the drawing board, and then I got to have a lot of impact there as well. Like I got a level design block out from our level designer, who is the same person as the game director, Matt. He's the one who designed all the levels.
A man with many hats.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, he made a new grey box for that first level, but then I sort of expanded it and added a bunch of sort of new areas and cool things, and I thought it turned out pretty good. And then also the last level in the game, if you remember, the sort of the last final challenge, this kind of a speedrun thing. That was really interesting to work on. Absolute pain in the ass to work on because like the tools really weren't set up to do the things that we do in that level, but it worked out. It's one of those where like the shadow map resolution kind of suffers because you have like 9 different sections of the level inside the the same level, and then they get sort of hidden and unhidden as you progress through that. And so like
you're kind of flying through it, so it's not too noticeable.
Yeah, you can't really
some random artist just staring at the floor.
Yeah, exactly. You can't really stop and smell the roses or anything like that.
All right, so these last 2 questions can be blended into one. This is kind of like the same spiel, but with all the projects you worked on, from your own startup on its own to Ollie to now Viewfinder, how do you manage to set up a strong foundational knowledge of stylized art without putting all your eggs into one specific style? And I guess bumping off that note, what are some things that you see in like a lot of portfolios, whether it be on Twitter, ArtStation, or now Kara, not sponsored.
Kara's cool.
Yeah, I really like Kara. What are some things that are often overlooked in a lot of these portfolios? Yeah,
so I've got quite a few notes for this. And in terms of like style, first of all, I'll just say like obviously I'm not the person who came up with these art styles. I kind of, in both cases of Ollie and Viewfinder, I was just hired to do production. And so with Ollie, which looks amazing, we didn't even talk about that, but Ollie was art directed by Paul Abbott, and the art style mostly comes from the concept artist Herman Carmona. Hopefully we'll have his name here somewhere. He is amazing, and like you look at his drawings.
Adrian, slam his name and his Instagram and whatever profile right there.
Yeah,
right there.
He's great. If you look at his drawings, and it's like that's what Ollie looks like. Like they went really hard, on trying to replicate that exact 2D style in 3D, which is super tricky. But yeah, and then Viewfinder was art directed by Jessica Cheng, and the art style was like mostly locked in when I joined the team, and that work was done I think by Sophie Knowles, my lead, and then a couple of others. But
their names up there too, future Adrian.
Yeah,
put them up there.
But yeah, so kind of well, first of all, let me get up on my soapbox and rant about stylized art, because it's a term that kind of bothers me. Because like, I'm sure that when you and I mention stylized art, we'll have some images, like stylized 3D, we'll have some images of what that looks like in our head, like chunky bevels, bold shapes, maybe like games like Overwatch or Genshin or League. But stylized can kind of mean anything, right? Like, Darkest Dungeon is stylized, Superhot is stylized, Paper Mario is stylized. So that's just something that bothers me. But like, that's the thing. Like, in a way, stylized art, like, there's no rules for stylized that aren't like universal art rules. And so that leads me to my sort of main points here, which are just like, how do you set up strong foundational knowledge? You work on your fundamentals. So focus on artistic fundamentals, really important stuff. I think a lot of 3D artists, I mean, again, I haven't been to like university for 3D, so what do I know? Maybe I'm speaking out of my ass, but like it feels like a lot of 3D artists sort of miss the sort of fundamental art education that you often get in 2D, but not so much in 3D, because you're so focused on learning the technical stuff about how to actually use Maya or whatever, right? And how to model things. You sort of start missing out on some of the fundamentals, but those are really important. So, good composition, shapes, lines, colors, lighting, flow, weight, things like that. Those are like, no matter what you do in the art field, those will help you. Really, I think stylized is, whatever stylized means, is often just like pushing some of these to more extreme versions than what you do in a sort of realistic or photorealistic kind of thing. I find that a lot of like where you can find knowledge like this is in like 2D education from illustrator, concept artist types on YouTube, or people like Feng Zhu, maybe Tyler Edlin. Those are pretty good YouTube channels. But also, like, you don't maybe necessarily even need. Well, I think it's always helpful to get some education from video lectures or whatever. But also, it is kind of the kind of thing that just develops organically as you grow as an artist and sort of develop your artistic intuitions, right? You start getting a better grasp of all of this, of like what looks good and what doesn't, is essentially what it boils down to, right? So that's one half of it. You can never go wrong with fundamentals, right? And then also just like obviously strong 3D like 3D modeling skills, just technical 3D skills of being able to model stuff. You can't really go wrong with that either, and it's kind of crucial. Like if you can model stuff from reference, then it doesn't really matter what that reference is, like if it's stylized or realistic. If you can match a concept, then you can match a concept. And obviously there's specific workflows and yada yada, but like especially for, like I wouldn't call Ollie or Viewfinder particularly challenging project in some of like the technical modeling side. Mm-hmm. Like Ollie, fairly low poly stuff, modeled some buildings. There was a huge amount of setup with how the line art in 3D was made in that game, with like really weird vertex color grouping stuff. But like it's still fair, that's not like a hard thing in terms of modeling. Like I didn't end up really modeling anything that challenged me, during that production, I don't think. And mostly the same thing with Viewfinder, right? So like, I don't know, what am I even saying? It's just, like, if you know how to model stuff, you know how to model stuff, essentially, right? I don't know, maybe cut out some bits of that, whatever.
That makes sense. It's like that whole, I think it was during like the Arcane documentary, people were like, oh, what technical stuff did you do to set up that painterly style? It's like, no, we just learned how to paint.
Oh yeah, like, that's a classic. Yeah.
That's a thing that circles around game dev Twitter like every couple months too.
Yeah, it does.
Like, oh, you just learned how to paint. It's similar to how like photorealistic artists look at real life, and especially pictures, and a lot of them go into photography to understand.
Yes, absolutely.
Composition and all that stuff. It's the same ideology. You just have to, like, we all have these baseline fundamentals we need to learn, and just to grow in our own little, I guess, like little niche sections of the art world. So just using everything from 2D and every like artistic baseline that's been grown since the dawn of man, and just apply it to 3D. So you just have to keep learning the basics.
Yeah, for sure.
Throw the reps in.
Yeah. And it is, I don't know.
You sound like a Sigma grindset motherfucker. Yeah. It's like, I'm like, yeah, but it's like you have to make art to make art. You have to make something bad to understand why it's bad. Yeah,
for sure. And like, I'm glad you pointed out photography, because I kind of forgot that. But that's definitely huge. I've noticed, especially for people who are more into realistic kind of 3D stuff, they do tend to gravitate towards photography, because it teaches you so much about lighting and composition. And even like looking at film, studying cinematography can help you a whole lot. And like with more stylized stuff, you'll generally tend to gravitate more towards maybe looking at animation instead of live footage, or you look at like paintings, both classical paintings and modern paintings, or contemporary like concept art, illustration stuff that's more stylized, and you start developing your sort of intuitions for maybe color and shape, in there. And yeah, and I don't know, in a way it's not really all that complicated, like composition rules, like, big, medium, small, balance, 70-30, balance of details and rest and all that kind of stuff. It's not rocket science, but also hard and fast rules, are never set in stone.
Like, they're made to be broken, but you have to know what the rules are.
Exactly.
Break them properly.
Yeah. And then I guess one final bit I should say is just, like, in terms of style, then, like, yeah, I know my personal projects are stylized in some way, I suppose. Like, vaguely, they sit in this realm of stylized art. I should probably have my personal work up here on the screen.
Oh yeah, no, I was gonna ask you when we wrap this up if I can like go through your Kara or
absolutely, just
your art and just like throw them up throughout in the beginning and right here towards the end as we're talking about personal work.
Yeah, for sure. What should I even say about my personal art? It's like it varies. It's always like I never really do like photoreal, like hyper realistic stuff, but even though some projects are maybe a bit more geared towards that, but like, yeah, it tends to be fairly chunky of rocks and things that I enjoy sculpting. I just love making bevels on rocks, man. What can I say? Like just chiseling rocks for hours in ZBrush. That's my meditation.
If I'm an artist, see a bevel on a rock, you go, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's so nice. As soon as you get like a really good chip in, you're like, oh fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Make this my whole personality for like a week and a half.
Exactly. But yeah, then you had your final bit in the question about portfolios and stylized art and what's overlooked. I really struggled with this. I suck at giving portfolio advice. But
I do too. I was kind of hoping you would know. So I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
No, because I'm such a fucking wuss, and like I know I'm not a moral absolutist, and I'll never give any strong advice. I think I've even tweeted like a million people tweeted this joke, but like never trust a senior who doesn't just always say it depends.
It depends.
It depends. Everything always depends, and that's definitely me. There's so many different factors, but yeah. So I don't really have amazing answers for anyone, but yeah, like I break a lot of the rules in terms of what a lot of people say in terms of what to put on your portfolio. Like, I'm not really focused on one style. I'm kind of all over the place. I even do character art sometimes. Various different styles. One thing that people tell beginners especially a lot is that always work from someone else's concept art. I've definitely broken that rule a bunch of times. I just make my own designs if I feel like it. That's the thing with rules, I guess. Again, they are meant to be broken to some extent. But yeah, so take my advice with a huge grain of salt, and like understand that your situation may be completely different. And like, I've worked in the indie space basically my entire career. If you're looking to work in AAA on big budget projects, you're probably not gonna want to come to me for advice. I don't know shit there. You can ask Adrian or any of the many wonderful people online who do give advice on that side. But I'd say for like beginners and student portfolios, that what I see the most that like annoys me is just bad presentation, right? Like having bad lighting or color or presentation on your portfolio. Like, good presentation can save a mediocre asset, and bad presentation can ruin an excellent asset. So you really don't even need. You look at a game like Elden Ring, which is fantastic and looks amazing. You look at any asset, it's kind of meh.
They're not like amazing assets. 90% of them have the same texture.
Yeah.
Like all the rocks and even the buildings are all the same. Like, tile, like the same tile texture.
Yeah.
But it's the amount of, it's like the grand scale of it and just how it's shown off. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and like like the render is pretty dated, right? It doesn't look amazing.
100%.
I mean, I don't want to throw any shade on the artists in terms of like the asset. Like I'm sure, for example, the sculpts of the bosses are just insane, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're just absolutely wonderful. But at the same time, like you go up to any sort of random prop in that game, and it doesn't look amazing.
Yeah.
And it's fine because the overall image is just like incredible. And so in the similar
their focus on silhouettes are generally phenomenal. That's one thing I've noticed as I'm replaying it. Timeline context, this is right before the DLC comes out. So it's like the way they set up all their silhouettes and the lighting, and even with something as simple as the light going from the down up, just gives a completely different feel.
Yeah.
Everything. It's just smart presentation.
For sure. And then like, God, I remember it just blew my mind when I played it when it came out, when like it just has these moments where you just step out of a cramped space into like this wide open vista. Like even at the very start of the game when you first see the Erd tree, it's just like amazing moments that are like clearly someone planned. Let's have like a big cool vista here, and oh God, it's just amazing. But yeah. So that's the presentation, super important. Like I was definitely pretty lazy about it in the beginning, I want to say. Like, I'd say maybe like I started really getting that it's important around 2018, 2019, so halfway through my career, right? I'd say my portfolio before that was kind of bad. But yeah, then I started sort of focusing on lighting. And again, this is where photography can help you a whole lot. You can just steal color palettes from film grabs, or paintings, and just repurpose the color palette for a completely different scene, and it's probably gonna work great, like, because if you steal a color palette from like one of the masters, like I don't know, Bierstadt, Hudson River School painter, it's just gonna look great no matter what you do with it. But then I also had this note, like in terms of going back to what I said earlier about like style and what it even means. So if I want to like get a bit deep into it, I think sometimes with like more beginner or student work in the sort of stylized realm, you don't see this kind of critical engagement with the question of what stylized is, like what does style mean, and that's important. Like obviously beginners are gonna really get it because they're focused on a million other things they're trying to learn at the same time, but like like a style is often there to achieve a certain thing, like Viewfinder's art style, a lot of that was designed to work within the limits of the game mechanics, right? And like, what can we actually do, and how can we make that appealing? And so like, when I see someone make like a quote unquote stylized asset, that's just like the generic thing you see with like chunky rock bevels and using trim dynamic on every hard corner, basically. That kind of thing.
Generic Overwatch buildings or like.
No, well, when it's specifically Overwatch, I do like it when people are like trying to mimic a style, because that teaches you a lot. That's an exercise I should do actually, is to just try to mimic Overwatch or something as much as like closely as possible. Honestly, I think that kind of thing teaches you a whole lot. But like when they go for just like generic stylized fantasy asset, without critically examining like what am I doing here, and like and like I kind of get why people fail at this or aren't so good at this, because it's a lot of hard work to establish a style, like art direction is hard actually. So yeah, but like like what is the style doing, what are the elements that actually compose the style, what are the things that I'm emphasizing, like where I'm like where am I even on the sort of stylized to realism spectrum? Even that I think is too simplified, you know, like, again, because it's not just like at one end of the spectrum you get stylized and at the other it's realism, right? It's not a one-dimensional spectrum because there's a bunch of styles, so it's more like 100-dimensional spectrum, you know, in every direction.
Yeah, it's like you start stylized and then for some reason you end up in Palea, Spider-Verse, and everything else in between. It's
yeah, exactly.
huge.
Yeah, you know, or 3D that looks like line art, like Ollie World, I guess, or some of the cool experiments you see with the cell shading and comic style from technical artists and things like that. But yeah, so like really I'm trying to understand, you know, like what makes up this style and how am I going to execute it? Like, am I emphasizing, you know, am I doing interesting forms, you know, using S curves and C curves and straight lines in interesting ways? Yeah. So like, I don't know, again, this sort of generic stylized look just kind of bothers me in a way. I mean, I do it all the time. I'm not saying I'm like better than anyone. But I think if you go for some kind of style, you should be aware of what your influences are, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not just like an amalgamation of all the different vaguely stylized things you've seen in popular media. Because first of all, what you should do is, like, you know, if you like the look of something, you should try to research what inspired them, right? Because that tells you a whole lot, you know, like, did you see that, like, Diablo 4 art direction talk that was, like, about how it was like these specific medieval paintings and stuff, that, or maybe Renaissance paintings that they looked at a bunch, and I can't really remember where that was from. Might not have been a GDC talk, might have just been a random thing, but, you know, like...
I'll try and look it up and throw it in the description or something.
Yeah, or you look at, like, I guess Dragon Age Inquisition is a good example where, like, you'll see, you know, they had this sort of tarot card thing going on, that inspired them, or you know, you look at stylized stuff like Overwatch, and, you know, it's very clearly inspired by Disney and 3D animation, right? A lot of it's just, you know, straight from that. So, like, why are you looking at, like, you know, and obviously, yes, look at Overwatch, it looks great most of the time, but, like, also look at what's influenced Overwatch, you know, and, you know, try to dig deeper and really see where all of these things come from. You know, don't just sort of look at the end product. Try to examine the sort of history, you know, be an art history nerd maybe if you want to be. So I think that teaches you a lot. You know, like with Overwatch, I think, you know, PBR came around, and, you know, PBR came from a Disney technical paper that everyone read and, you know, started implementing in game engines. That was, what, 2013, 2014 when PBR started becoming a thing.
Yeah, and then everything became like hard surface metal.
Yeah, right.
For a while.
Yeah, but then, like, you know, because it came from Disney, you're like, well, obviously we can now try to emulate Disney, because that was kind of what we were going for with Mid-Air 1 in many ways. Okay. I mean, the game looks like shit, but like we're trying to go for like a very similar thing to like Overwatch. Because it's like, oh yeah, well, we can kind of now do like Disney-esque material reads and things like that. And so a lot of our references for characters and environments and stuff were actually like just Disney, and, you know, similar sort of contemporary 3D animation at the time. And then we were working on that game, and then the Overwatch trailer comes out, and we're like, oh, okay, Blizzard's doing this way better than us. Fuck.
Man.
But yeah.
We need to have... I would love to get a group of, you know, artists at some point, and we can just talk like influences and art direction and different styles and stuff, you know what I mean? Just so we can go like really through, because this is it'll probably be for a separate video. It'll most definitely be for a separate video.
Yeah.
But breaking down certain games and where they get their influences from, or even where we get our influences from in terms of art direction and like what we always have on our ref board, I think would be a really interesting conversation.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I actually had an interview question about this that fucked me up not too long ago, where like, you know, they asked like what are my big influences, and I kind of froze like I don't know, but I should know.
That's such a good question. I'm gonna steal that. It's gonna fuck over a lot of people, but that's such a good question.
It can be really hard, you know, because like, I mean, you know, I'm influenced by my peers, like all of you guys, you know, and everyone who I see posting on Twitter, stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really, you know, influential all the time. You see something cool and you remember like, oh, you know, that's a really cool way of doing things. You know, maybe even if it's just a specific technique of doing certain 3D things, maybe I'd still call that an influence, right? Because technique does affect how you make stuff, you know, and how stuff ends up looking. You know, we're thinking about like, yeah, I don't know. What was I saying? Lost my train of thought. But yeah, like, yeah, trying to figure out like who actually are my big influences, and you know, like who influenced me a lot early on, and then I, you know, went back through history to my ArtStation likes from like, you know, 8 years ago to see what was I actually liking on ArtStation at the time. That was a really interesting trip down memory lane. But yeah,
I think one of the funniest things about that will happen on occasion is that you have someone who's on your reference board for years, and then you meet them, like whether on Twitter or just a random job interview, you're like, oh my god, I've had you on my ref board for years.
Yeah, really,
and now you're just talking to me.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to not be starstruck sometimes with those moments, right? It's like kind of embarrassing, but like, I don't know. Maybe I think we should sometimes just be sort of unapologetic fanboys. Like, why not?
That's what I'm saying. It's like, bring it back. Like, we don't have to idolize you, but it's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
You helped me so much. What the fuck is happening?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a sort of interesting moment where I realized I don't actually have a clear idea in the moment of like, you know, who's really influenced me. I was able to like point to some games, and then, you know, people like Orb is obvious, right? Like, what stylized 3D artist isn't influenced by Orb? We all use his fucking brushes.
That just needs to be default by this point now.
Yeah, but so then after that, because I was kind of mad at myself for freezing in that, I did go and like actually research myself and like try to figure out who am I, like who are the influences that I consider sort of big in my life, and I feel very limited because like there's only like the stuff that's sort of influenced me very directly in my professional life over the past 10 years, right? But then you've got all your childhood influences of like what media you grew up with. That's obviously also massive. But I thought that was a really kind of a good exercise to do, actually. It's just to like list all the artists who really influenced you, and yeah, I might as well pull up the Google Doc I made for it, because it ended up being like a lot of names, but then I had to trim it down. But yeah. For example, I almost forgotten this by now, but like Helder Pinto from used to work on Overwatch, now has that Europa game that he's working on.
Oh shit.
Do you know him?
Yeah, I've seen his Europa work.
Yeah. I mean, he was active on Polycount like, you know, years and years ago. So I was a huge fan of him at the time, and you know, people like him and Tor Frick and stuff like that. And Orb as well. But like, Helder Pinto had a Tumblr blog that was like his influence slash ref board. And I would follow that thing religiously and just like steal all his refs. And I think he still runs it, or at least like a few years ago he was still maintaining it. Because you could see the change from when he started working on Europa. You know, like when he was on like Overwatch and before, it was like a lot of sci-fi mechanical stuff, often like stylized sci-fi concept art, and then he starts working on Europa, and you can see transform, the full Tumblr sort of grid of images and stuff start transforming into this sort of Ghibli, nature-y kind of thing, which is, really interesting. But yeah, it's kind of something I'd forgotten, and it's really cool to sort of remember that. But yeah.
That's so awesome. All right. Well, that's all I have. Do you have anything else you want to say before we end it here?
Do I? Probably not, honestly. I think we can end it there.
Oh, fuck yeah. Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for taking the time to talk to my dumbass and explaining all the very intricate and very technical side of Viewfinder. And if you want to shout out your socials, whatever ones you want to do, you could just say them out loud and I'll throw them on screen and put them in the description. So go for it.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Kara as Voidy3D. You can find me there. I think a couple other places. Yeah, wherever artists usually hang out, I'll be under that name.
All right, cool.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
All right. No, thank you. This has been amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and doing all the good stuff.